The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
And welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast. I'm Deborah Monk, empowering you to find your creative voice.
I'm Shelly Devlin, inspiring you to find your why.
And today, Barb Wallace, author extraordinaire, is back with us.
I like the author extraordinaire.
I love that. You should put it on your business card.
That's it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Barb Wallace, awesome.
Oh, we should get a tattoo on our forehead. And today...
You should do it in reverse so that you can always read it
in the mirror.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
while
and
you're
then
shaving.
people would really say, "What is that?"
It's a career maker.
Or breaker.
Just ask Mike Tyson.
Ooh. So today we're going over mistake number 8. We're all the way up to there with Barb Wallace's help. And today we're talking about telling, not showing.
Right.
So Barb, we have this listed as number 8, but I think we'd all agree this is such a common mistake that it's easy to do it at every stage of being a writer, as when you're a beginner writer, an intermediate writer, or an advanced.
I think it's one of my number ones.
It definitely is number one.
I think it is for everyone.
I do too. That's the point.
So
I do it
confusing.
too. And I think one of the things is style-wise, telling is now sort of in vogue. Like a lot of authors tell all the time, and it works for them.
Well,
But
Shelly, don't you feel a little bit cooler right now already, now that we know something that's in vogue?
Yes, I do.
It's in vogue? Can you give examples of any authors?
not off the top of my head. I think a lot of today's literary authors are very much like that.
Interesting. Well, that takes us off the table. We're not quite literary.
In their defense, they probably know the difference, and they have just chosen the way they want to do their narration.
So basically, Shelly and I have to just stop doing it.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh.
You can,
Well, we have
but
to try.
it helps if you know the difference, and then you can make an
I think
educated
sometimes
choice.
it's how you say it. And when I listened to everything you had to say for this podcast, I was like, what your words made sense to me than anybody else that's ever said it. You know, stop telling.
Right.
You need
because
to show.
the
I'm
truth,
like, what the hell does that mean?
because I think Shelly will confess that she has come and said, I know this section is telling and I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
Right, what else am I going to do?
I'm showing you. But I'm telling you
I
a
do
damn
that all the
story.
time, and I'll sit there going, is this showing? Is this telling? And
And how do you differentiate?
well, okay, first, fair is fair. I went and got a lot of help with this one because it is one of my weaker ones, too. So Shirley Jump, friend of the program, gave me a lot of background information, so I need to give her credit. But
Hi, Shirley.
Hi, Shirley. Showing is basically giving the information. You know, she walked across the room, she picked up the phone. You know, there wasn't a lot of static in the other line because recently they repaired the lines, and, you know, you're just providing a lot of information. Whereas showing is doing it through the human experience. A few weeks ago, I think we talked about how, like, if you look at writing like a camera where you're either going close up or pulling back, and a good way to show the difference between showing and telling, or to explain it, is if you think of yourself as doing a camera like on a news show, and you can either do a big wide lens and show all the action, or you can get really, really tight on one person and show their reaction and their experience and have it speak for everything. So showing is really getting into your character's deepest point of view and seeing it through their eyes and how they react to things, how they would see things.
Interesting.
You had commented on like it's being a news reporter. Short little descriptions that kind of, that's going to tell them, that's more showing than telling.
And no, which will tell you a more powerful story. They both will tell you the story. If you show a huge protest, or you show the little girl crying with her sign up saying, you know, my mother was arrested for this crime or something, and it really captures that one big emotion that everyone can experience.
Right.
Which is more a powerful way to do it. And that's why we say show instead of tell.
That's a really great point, to use the emotion to make the difference.
And use the senses and unfold it more slowly. You want
Right.
Which isn't to say to overlay it with, I'm stuttering a lot, but not to say make it super heavy with description. That's not the same thing. You know what I mean? Am I making sense? You know, it's one thing to describe the room or describe the room through the character's eyes.
Right.
So if I'm at a funeral, I'm going to notice something different than if I'm at a party.
Exactly. And what you're going to notice will be different than what Shelly notices.
We went to a TED Talk this weekend, and it was amazing the things she was noticing versus what I was noticing.
Were we talking about the stage?
The
Just
curtains.
The curtains.
She was noticing the curtains weren't ironed. And you know what I did? I looked down to check if my own clothes were ironed.
There you go.
We were talking about taking a picture, though, so I was like setting the stage.
And it's important.
Wrinkled curtain. It was yelling at me.
Well, carrying that through, like your funeral example, what you'd notice if it was your father who you loved dearly
versus your father who you hated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or the father you killed.
Ooh, I like that.
Like you would see something different again.
You'd look for, did I leave evidence behind?
Are
My
people
fingerprints on his
People
buttons.
are looking at me. What am I saying? Do I look grieving enough? Versus, oh my God, I can't believe he's gone. And this is awful. Or, wow, I'm glad he's gone. You know, their character is going to view everything, and the smells, the senses, their memories, everything is going to reflect on them. So you want to always focus on their point of view.
Doesn't this go back, and forgive me, but wasn't there one of these episodes that we did where you were laying out the storyboard for each character and what their backstory is, even though the backstory doesn't necessarily make it into this plot, what their backstory is going to dictate what and how and why they see the world the way they see it.
Yes. I don't know if we did that one or if we're going to do that one, but I know we talked about it.
I'm in a time warp.
No, but we did talk about characters reacting in a certain way. I remember that. We did that was where you were forcing characters into a hole versus how they should react based on their background and their backstory. So I know we did talk about that. And you'll notice that all these tips seem to kind of weave in together and make one big...
in a way, it makes it easier because you can start to see how there's just this common wrong way to do it, and then it's a guided right way. Well, so for fun, I wrote a little example. This is completely fictional, of course.
Oh, God, that means it's about me.
Usually.
That husband, blah, 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 blankety, blankety, blank, blank, blank. Do you have a button, Jonathan, in case I swear? Don't worry, I won't. It's not about you. Okay, so here's the first paragraph. I danced with Anthony last night and it felt very good. We worked on the technique of using shoulders and hips, and I think this will improve my dancing. Now, that was one example, and afterwards you can tell me whether it's which one is telling and which one is showing. So here's the second one. Last night, I turned the waltz song up so loud that the tension of the violin strings filled the room. I took a deep, slow breath and inhaled the music, filling my shoulders and hips with an ache that matched the mood of the song. Anthony and I moved across the floor with the control of a seagull so far out over the ocean that she didn't know if she could ever find her way back to shore. Once again, I found heaven on the dance floor.
God, you're good, Deb. Damn it. Wait, pick me. First one's telling.
Shelly.
First one's telling. Second one's showing.
Yeah, well, I would say that, yeah.
I thought I did a really good job. Yes. And what I didn't realize I did do is that I use the emotion. Because I tell you the exact same thing. I danced last night with Anthony. We worked on hips and shoulders, and I think my dancing will get better. Those are the facts of both stories, both paragraphs. But one is tuning into the emotion, the feeling, the reason why someone would do something. You know, improving my dancing is probably not is not as motivating as finding heaven. Right. You know, do you want to be a better dancer, Shelly, or do you want to go to heaven? It's kind of an easy question.
Right.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. I was going to say, it's from your perspectives. So it was how you felt.
Right. Oh, that would be interesting. Now, if we were to find
what you were showing,
fictional Anthony, I wonder how he felt.
Right. But you were showing the event through your feelings and emotions.
Right.
Not his or far away from the lens where we just saw you dancing.
Right.
And, this rule applies for nonfiction and fiction. Because it's very easy, especially like if you're writing memoirs, which I know you ladies are, to just pull back and just record all the events.
So sometimes do you start with the recording all the events and then have to go back and like fluff in the color?
Oh yeah,
the emotion?
I was going to say, and actually I actually have a big note across my notes that most of this stuff is usually fixed in revision. Because if you start, you could slow yourself down forever if you start trying to write it perfectly the first draft. And so I wrote the biggest writer mistake, which we have not covered, but the biggest one that all writers make is, a lot of beginner writers especially, not revising.
I don't even know if that's listed in our 10. Do we
It's
have to
not.
we have to add a show then?
No, we don't. But
Jesus, not revising? Get me on that bus. My book would have been
No,
done
that's
like
not an
2.5
option.
years
She's
ago.
Not a
saying-
choice. It's
No.
not a choice, Shelley.
No.
the biggest mistake
Slow
that
They
your roll.
make is
a
not to
lot
do
of
it.
beginner writers figure I wrote it and it's fine and send it out.
Oh, God.
Or they revise it based on proofreading, but they don't necessarily go in and really look at the language and their word choice. And I have some tips, actually, courtesy of Shirley Jump. I'm giving her a lot of credit, but courtesy of her, that things that you can use to look at your writing to see if it's showing or telling.
Okay, we'll take those tips, please.
Okay. Well, the first is no ly words.
No adverbs.
No, he said emphatically is not the same as he yelled.
Right.
You keep your description relevant. So everything you choose to describe should have a purpose to the plot.
Totally agree with that one. And I think I'm good at that, actually. Sorry. And the way I do it is I write the scene and then I think, okay, what I need to show is, that she's wishful. So I'll
Exactly.
have her notice a dandelion, or I'll have her notice something. So I go for
Exactly.
the emotion, and then I think if I were looking to show that, how would that translate into the physical world?
Exactly. And now you see why it comes in revision and not first draft, because you may not think about that the first draft. First draft, you're more interested in getting her in the scene, get the scene
And
done.
you're having the conversation and the talking.
Exactly.
Whatever's happening between the characters. That's more important than the picture on the wall. But then when I need to set that in. okay.
Exactly. You want to use small details rather than the big picture. Again, we talked about that. The girl clutching the teddy bear is more powerful than a big crowd of people around the burning building.
Right.
Very true.
Try harder with your words. You want to use very powerful verbs, very powerful adjectives, and you don't have to keep belaboring it.
Pick and choose.
Pick and choose, but the good example is her pulse skittered, or skidded, versus her pulse picked up
or raced.
or raced. Or the one Shirley uses, a tear skated down her cheek versus
you're
her
saying
eyes
that's
welled
bad.
up with tears.
Right. Okay, good. Because for a second I thought, well, that's kind of, but it better be cold out.
But you know what I mean? You want to, but verbs are especially. You
Right.
stomp, bang, and your character will have very specific verbs, based on whether he's angry or he's soft, and feeling in a soft mood. I feel bad for everyone who's listening because I am way over caffeinated. But I'm sorry, people. But you're going to use different, based on their emotions, are going to bring up different verbs. And then finally, you want to be specific to the character. So women notice different things as men. We talked about at the funeral what someone did based on their backstory. Another one is if they're a child versus an adult,
Right.
or their height.
Well, their height, interesting.
If someone's 5'1" and someone's 6'1", they're going to see things much differently.
Those of us over 6'1" hit our head on a lot of things, so we're very pensive when we walk into rooms.
And then the last thing is
Pensive, huh?
Oh, good one.
Pretty good.
Very good.
Pretty,
Good verb.
pretty good.
Good.
the final tip, which I like, is using dialogue versus heavy narrative.
Right.
I mean, you
Which
could
is a great one.
Right. You could spend forever telling the story and then, about how you drank one gin and tonic and then you drank another gin and tonic and then you drank a third gin and tonic. And by that point, you were getting a loopy. Or you can cut right to your partner across the table going, that's your fourth. Don't you think you should slow down? Which one shows it better?
Good point.
That's why my editor always says, add dialogue here, add dialogue there.
Dialogue
there.
can do a lot. You
Yeah,
can-
Barb's good at dialogue.
more so than I am narrative sometimes. But the description. But dialogue can give you so much. You can convey a lot just by what someone says or doesn't say.
But how do you show dialogue that you don't say?
You do it with subtext.
What you let them know what the person's thinking? I
Well,
wanted
no,
to say
okay.
you're a bitch, but I said instead I said you want to go for coffee?
Kind of. What is it? For example, I'll use your pencil. I'm talking to my father, and I just wrote the scene, which is why I know it. And he's talking about how he thinks you made a mistake moving to London to do this job. You should be home doing your job as a financial planner, and this break you took is a ridiculous idea. And you're talking to him and you're going, yeah, I understand. Yeah, you got a good point. Meanwhile, you're taking the pencil and jabbing it into the cement, while you're talking.
So what you're saying is your actions and your dialogue are opposite, which only emphasizes how much you don't agree.
Right.
Whereas if you said, I don't agree, that's not as impactful.
Exactly. So, the same dialogue based with the subtext underneath it will show something different.
Got it.
And you can use your subtext to show things. If I say, another good example is there's a great movie called Gilda. I don't know if any of you have seen it. You would love it.
About Gilda Radner?
No, it's called Gilda. It's with Rita Hayworth. And she's talking about hate being a very powerful emotion and how hate builds up this passion and it wells up. And she's going on this big, long speech. And as she's saying it, she's coming closer and closer and closer to him. And he's like just staring at her and just, I hate you too, Johnny. And they like kiss passionately.
Deb would love that.
I would.
And it's a great scene because she's talking about them hating each other as they're basically seducing each other.
Interesting. Well,
I don't know. We got off on a tangent, but that is another way to show something is have them talking about one thing, but using their
meaning
actions
another.
Exactly.
Right.
So instead of saying, but really she was attracted to him even though she protested, or you can have her slipping, the dress off her shoulder as she's talking about, I really don't think we should be doing this as she pulls down the side of her blouse.
Boy. I think also something interesting that hit me while you were talking that I've never really thought about for Shelly and I is she's a very visual person and she's very specific on her visual, what she sees. So maybe it's harder for her. I don't know. I'll have to pull back or to pull in. And I think I just think that
I think you want to vary it. Everybody wants to vary it.
Exactly.
You want to just a personal preferences. I think sometimes you want to be super close and sometimes it's more emotionally impactful to pull out.
Can you give an example of something that would be more emotionally impactful by pulling out? You gave the example of focusing in on the one little girl with the protest sign with the tear on her face, how her mom's been arrested. What would be a good example of when pulling out is the better idea?
I can do one, actually. It's in a book I just read where she talks about describing an accident that she saw her mother in. And then she pulls back to the big point of view and it's just, I climbed into the ambulance. I took my mother's hand. We rode to the hospital in silence.
So when she's first telling us about the accident, do we know it's her mother?
Yes. And you get this, she goes into great description about seeing it, but then she pulls back and she's very omnipotent,
viewpoint.
Yeah. And saying, I just sat in the ambulance. I held her hand. We rode to the hospital in silence. She's telling you what happened, but it's much more impactful because it's just short, succinct, and you don't really need to go into detail about what she's feeling at that moment because she did it earlier when she saw the horror of the accident.
I see. I think actually that will be really good advice for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes pulling back and being short and simple actually hits a bigger bang.
Whew. And then sometimes this writing just seems so, I want someone to tell me how to do everything. No, show me how to do everything. I don't care. Tell me, show me anything. Well, hopefully we've taught our listeners how to tell and not show. If you want to hear this episode
Pretty sure
again.
It's the other way around. Show, not tell.
Good point. If you want to hear this episode again to go back and check out and see if I know what I'm talking about, then you want to go to the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. That's UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. You'll find this podcast and the vodcast, that's video on demand, in case you want to watch it again. Find this episode and all previous episodes on the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv and please subscribe.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.